Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Welcome to the Print Soft Cover. Today we have with us Mr. Amod Kant. He has served as the DGP in Arunachal Pradesh. He has served in the CBI. He has done a lot of social work. He's also been awarded with the title of a global hero by the United States government for combating human trafficking. And he has done extensive work in cases we can't even imagine, right from the Indira Gandhi assassination to Rajiv Gandhi assassination, then the terror incidents that struck Delhi post those incidents, and including cases of narco terror. So, name the cases, name the crime IPC sections, and Mr. Amod Kant has worked in all those aspects of crime that one can ever imagine. Welcome to the Print, sir. And today we are here to launch his book, which he has written. The publication is Bloomsbury, India, and it's an excellent book, sir. We have wrapped it up in a beautiful pink, vibrant cover called Khaki in the Dust Storm, which is Police Diaries Part 1, actually having a summary of all these cases of what went on behind the scenes while he was investigating these important cases. So we have the book wrapped in a beautiful pink cover. It's called Khaki in Dust Storm and is published by Bloomsbury, India. Many congratulations, sir, on this excellent book. In fact, I had the pleasure of reading this book. I had the honor of reading this book. And I actually completed it within 3 days, and it's such an extensive. It was like a treasury. I mean, we spoke in the morning, I remember, and I remember telling you, and I'm saying that again, that it was like a treasure for a crime reporter like me to actually get hold of these details of what went on behind the scenes while you were investigating these important cases, which are actually historic. So, welcome to the Print, sir. And I'll just pass on the baton to you. And please tell us about this book. What prompted you to write this, and why is this called Khaki in Dust Storm?
Thank you, Ananya, for this beautiful introduction. Well deserved or not deserved will be people's choice.
No, absolutely well deserved, sir.
Okay. Now let me tell you that while I was in Arunachal Pradesh, that was almost the last lap of my service. Although again, after that stint in the police, I took over as chairman of Child Rights Commission, a different kind of work. But in a way, it was a period, the penultimate period of nearly 34 years of policing. And I've always been in the habit of writing more like diaries, more like scribbling the events of the day, even the minute details of the incidents, the case FIR numbers, and the details of investigation, like people involved, the accused person, suspected, etc., etc. All those things I've been writing all through my career. Because in Delhi police, we always had a system where we were supposed to give daily diary, So the SHOs report to Assistant Commissioners of Police, or DYSPs, they report to SPs or DCPs, and DCPs report to Joint Commissioner. So in a way, I had always been doing it. I was Additional Deputy Commissioner of South, then Deputy Commissioner of Police West Delhi, then Deputy Commissioner of Police Central Delhi. Then finally, I became DCP Crime for the whole of Delhi. And subsequently, I went to CBI, all that stuff. So it was absolutely essential to keep track of things, to keep recording, which I used to record since the very beginning of my career. Now, what happened that while at Arunachal, I had some time, although it was a very preoccupying, a very interesting place. Arunachal is a very fascinating place, as you know. I traveled extensively. But whenever I had opportunity, I would like to bring back the material from Delhi, the diaries and the facts, and will dictate. And that way, I wrote about 400 pages in a matter of 2 years' time. So then that went on and on. Some publishers took it for publication. It hung on. Then I was in the government. I didn't want to publish many things. So after that, recently, thanks to Bloomsbury, this particular material, all that stuff, manuscript, they saw, and they're very keen to publish. So this happens to be the first in the series of my volumes. The first volume is called, as you know, Khaki in Dust Storm. This volume 1, or perhaps diary number 1. Second 2 would follow, one doesn't know when. Now, why Khaki in Dust Storm? I mean, that it's a fascinating kind of title. Many people
Absolutely.
they like it also. And the police life, the police work is extremely chaotic, extremely uncertain. And then what happens to you tomorrow is probably not known to you today. And you are actually the investigator or the narrator or the keeper of all that information and presenter of all that information and evidence which happens in the realm of uncertainty. And well, there have been riots, there have been cases, there have been most unfriendly situations. So Dust Storm is a befitting kind of background, befitting cover for that kind of career, that kind of life. So
Right.
we are having
Excellent.
this title.
We'll be talking about the book and the chapters that you have divided the book into. But before that, just more of a general question on policing. When we talk about policing, like for a layman, everybody would want to know the other side of the story as well. Now, how difficult is policing, considering the fact that there are so many factors at play? Whether it is pressures from seniors, whether it is political pressure, whether it is to portray a certain kind of an incident in a certain way, whether it is bringing out whatever details there are on paper, what goes on record, what remains off record, what kind of challenges are there in policing? And of course, police is always on the receiving end whenever it comes to scrutiny, like, media scrutiny, public scrutiny. So the police is one agency that has to bear with everything and goes through all of this.
See what happens that a policeman who becomes the prison of his own culture. I call it police subculture. One of my celebrated bosses, Ved Marwa, about whom I have written in the book extensively, he wrote something called police subculture, and police subculture is a very preoccupying, very strong, encapsulating kind of subculture.
Right.
Now you are not able to look out.
Mhm.
See, I had the unique kind of experience, unlike the majority of police officers. First of all, I worked in hardcore policing, the hardcore policing in terms of investigation of very, very serious crimes, extraordinary crimes, in terms of handling law and order situation, which really makes the crux of police function, in terms of regulating various situations, regulating crowds. Then, of course, regulating a lot of places. Like I was DCP licensing for nearly 1 year, couple of months. So the licensing of cinema houses, licensing of explosive shop, like licensing of variety of eating and entertainment places. All that also came as a part of my work during my career. So police that way is a function which goes into various types of activities. But then you have generally the insider's view, and I had the insider's view. So apart from 34 years of policing, as you know, that for nearly 32 years now, I have been running a major organization, which you mentioned already, Prayas. I started Prayas in 1988. That was on the 15th year of my service. While I had huge experience already, huge involvement and deep involvement in matters relating to police, something happened. There was a need for the children who were lost and found to be looked after. And I looked after also the missing persons squad of Delhi police, where the children, by the evening, in various police stations of Delhi, we were supposed to look after and keep some children. And there was no arrangement, there was no planned program for them. In those times, we didn't have, like today, shelter homes for children. We had government homes only.
Right.
So we decided to create an activity for these kind of children, and Prayas was born. So from that time till the time I remained in service, what is nearly 20 years. So I had 15 years of hardcore experience in policing, got into the social sector, voluntary sector, where it became a very serious affair for me, a very deep involvement. Prayas, a leader of my organization. Today, I'm also the member coordinator of Niti Ayog's standing committee for CSOs in the country. So I'm deep into the social sector and voluntary sector. So they combined, and nearly 20 years, it was a common period. So whatever I think today, whatever I look back and try to introspect or retrospect my career, I find a very strange combination, and people may also find in the book, of being a policeman from inside and being a person, a social worker from outside. So in this book, I have attempted to combine these two kinds of situations.
Very interesting. You have pointed out the actually need for community policing that you have been in fact following and practicing while you were in service, and even now, I would say. So, sir, and a very interesting bit about, you talk about police rules being very myopic, and the myopic conventional police rule, you call it. Why do you say that, and why? What do you think needs to change, and if it is practical?
See, very few people know, although everybody happens to be a customer for the police, a client for the police. There is hardly any person, any family in the country who doesn't have any contact with the police or interface with the police. But
Absolutely.
they do not know what the police does and why the police behaves in a particular manner. In fact, the India's criminal justice system, the entire criminal justice system, that happens to be in a peculiar kind of situation where the ordinary man is not able to understand it. Even educated, qualified people don't understand. At times, even judges don't understand, lawyers don't understand, the
Right.
policemen don't understand. So
Right.
let me clarify that point in response to your question. See, first of all, the Indian police is the direct product of 1857 Sepoy Mutiny, which was called First War of Indian Independence. 1857, mind you. Soon after the East India Company rule finished and the Crown took over the direct responsibility of India's governance, and they created a legal system. And that legal system, among the first laws was 1861 Indian Police Act, mind you, number one. Secondly, about the same time and subsequently, three basic laws for criminal justice system was formulated and implemented: Indian Penal Code, Criminal Procedure Code, and Evidence Act, which I call the troika of criminal justice system, and of course Indian Police Act. So they created that kind of framework, they created that kind of base on which India's criminal justice system still persists. Our system is the same as it was done in 1861 or 1860s. Now, the issue is that this entire set of laws, including Indian Police Act, was created to repress people. It was created to maintain the empire. It was created to control India and keep under subjugation. And of course, that has continued. So that is first part of it, which really holds the police from whatever it is. And the Indian police happens to be archaic, and Indian
Right.
criminal justice system happens to be archaic from that point of view. That is one part. Now, from there, I straightway jump to Indian Constitution.
Right.
1950, following India's independence, we had a kind of constitution which is a wish list. It's like a dream document. It's like an ideology. And Indian Constitution is one of the most forward-looking constitutions in the world. And then it has almost everything, most of the things which gives you the promises and possibilities of a future which is very progressive, democratic, secular, that kind of India. Now, following the Indian Constitution, and even prior to that sometimes, we have series of social legislations concerning women, children, disabled, elderly, poor, deprived, backward classes, minorities, scheduled caste tribe, all types of things. So various laws have been created, which I prefer to call social legislations. And now many of these laws are to be implemented by the police. So Indian police is at a very peculiar juncture. I mean, it's in a dilemma
Right.
kind of situation. On the one hand, they are being controlled, or they have to work within the framework which is outdated. On the other side, they have to work with the laws which are far ahead of time. Our laws
Right.
are actually ahead of even Western countries or USA many a times. And I had the opportunity, while working for both, while working for the police and working for the social sector, of implementing and at times helping in the formulation of laws like Juvenile Justice Act, laws
Right.
like Protection of Children Against Sexual Offences Act, Child Labor Act. I have been party to it, and I have been
Right.
party to implementation also. So the Indian police faces a very peculiar kind of challenge, where an aspirational society wants it to change and its framework doesn't let it change. Okay.
Right. And so you have also been very vocal about police reforms, talking about police reforms at various forums. So, and in your book also, I found like that undertone of how police reforms are very necessary in this system. And you've also said, and I've noted it down, that advocating of police reforms while practicing unconventional methods. What do you mean by that?
No, the police reforms, as we talk of it today, actually it has been going on for decades again.
Absolutely.
There have been efforts in various law commissions, various police
Right.
commissions, and the most important set of police commissions came soon after the emergency in the Janata government 77. And that time, very surprisingly, which I have written in the book also, that it was Jayaprakash Narayan who had
Right.
once given the call to various forces not to obey legal orders. He
Right.
had suggested that there should be a police commission. And Dhanvira, who was a former governor, and a lot of other people, the most important being Mr. K. F. Rustamji, who had brought this idea from Mr. Jayaprakash Narayan to the government
Right.
to create this police commission. And the police commission gave series of recommendations, which are very, very kind of important. And if they are really implemented, probably police will change substantially, I'll say, not completely.
Right.
And what happened that when since 1970s they were not implemented, one of our seniors called Prakash Singh, a former DG police, he filed a petition in the Supreme Court of India.
Right.
Honorable Supreme Court of India passed a judgment in 2006.
Yeah.
And that judgment, well, it has given far-reaching recommendations again. They have accepted most of the recommendations made by Police Commission and other commissions concerning the police. And those recommendations, unfortunately, have not been implemented even now, 14 years later.
Right.
But I had a little encounter with this Supreme Court order. While I was DG Police of Arunachal Pradesh, these orders came. Fortunately, Mr. Bam, who was the Chief Secretary, was a very nice person and very forward-looking person. And both of us together went to Chief Minister, and we were able to convince him that it's a very important Supreme Court judgment, which should be implemented. And we really got it implemented in many ways, tried to get it implemented in many ways in Arunachal Pradesh, which was taken note of by Honorable Supreme Court of India also, that Arunachal perhaps was the first state where it was implemented.
I remember.
But then subsequently they realized, the political masters and the bureaucratic masters realized that, well, for them, it was not exactly a good thing. So that was, I do not know what happened to it. But then police reforms has not been carried out in the manner desired by court, in the manner desired by the commission. I feel very strongly about it because it's by thinking that people who are in power, people who are in authority, those who have got access to the power and those who can get their work done, they can access to court, they can access to police, they can do all these things. They are not really interested in carrying out these reforms.
Right.
These reforms ultimately will help the common man, the ordinary people, the deprived, the poor, the marginalized. They may become the beneficiaries of the police reforms ultimately, because the police and the criminal justice system, to my opinion, is meant for these kind of people. It is not always, and perhaps more meant for these kind of people and the rich and the powerful. So that is the position, and the police reforms is hanging fire. Very, very marginally it has been carried out, and we are waiting for the time when it gets carried out. Okay.
Right. So just to give a peek into the book to our viewers, I'll just start with the 1984 riots. That's the first chapter, from, when you were DCP Central and you get that call when you're just leaving for work and you're bidding your wife goodbye, and you get that call saying that there's an attempt to murder and there's an attack at the PM. If you could just recall that moment for us and tell us what really went into your head and what made you say, was that a policeman?
Well, that was a momentous day, momentous morning. I can never forget it, that morning or the following days. See, yes, my house was just behind my office, and there was a wall separating the two. So I had to go. In between, there is Daryaganj police station.
Right.
So I was about to leave, and I was having some chat with my wife. Suddenly, my wireless operator, who generally carries the information from time to time, across the road on the other side was our control room, Central Delhi control room. I was Deputy Commissioner of Police, Central Delhi that time, the most sensitive district of Delhi. That time we had only 6 districts in Delhi, and sensitive Delhi was most important. Among the most important was Central Delhi. He came and told कि madam को गोली लग गई. He told that madam means Mrs. Gandhi was shot at. And very, very instinctively it came to my mind. Till date, I am not able to explain myself. Why should I say that? Was it a policeman?
Yeah.
Perhaps because, I had done myself a lot of duties, not with Indira Gandhi, but her predecessors.
Okay.
Some time back, I was in the security also. I must have spent many, many nights in the building adjacent the Prime Minister's house, and we used to take the round of it. So I had a fairly good idea of the Prime Minister's house, number one. And inside it happens. So some thought, I don't wish to explain that. Then after that, somehow it occurred to me that Indira Gandhi assassination was not going to be an ordinary thing.
Right.
I thought, and I said it also, that probably there could be a civil war-like situation.
Right.
I knew it very well. I mean, that way I was a conscious person living in Delhi and working in Delhi police. You have different type of understanding also if you're a person with certain kind of thought process.
Right.
So I immediately gave call to all my officers, of the district, the SHOs and the assistant commissioners of police. And I talked to the people who could get the civil defense people also on job and home guards also on job, so
Right.
that we could plan for it. And within an hour or two, I think by 11:30, I was in a position to talk to them.
Right.
And I told them that the following days could be perhaps the most difficult days for us. Some of us may not be here. I went to the extent of saying like that. And I said that we have to protect, we have to guard. And then it's almost like warlike situation which developed soon after, because Bahadur Shah Jafar Marg, which happens to be the Fleet Street of India, there this information started coming up.
Right.
Gandhi's body was lying in All India Institute of Medical Sciences.
Right.
And then, of course, the process started. We will talk about it later. But then, in a way, I had some premonitions. And then I tried to do whatever best could be done during
Right.
1984 riots.
So how were the Sikh policemen briefed? Because I recall reading that you said it was the most important police briefing of your police career. So what happened after that, soon after that? Because of course, when you have a team that you're leading, you need to brief those people because you can anticipate what is going to happen. Probably they are not ready, they do not know what to do. How you as a leader brief them at that moment, and especially the Sikh policemen, which you also mentioned in the book, were a little upset because they were not given those postings and those were largely asked to remain inside.
No, that's a very critical question. See what happened, that the events and the incidents, they almost overwhelmed Delhi police.
Right.
As it happened in other districts of Delhi where the massacre was much more.
Right.
It happened in my district also. In the police headquarters, at a time when the entire Delhi was almost inundated by events,
Right.
and central Delhi not being exception, there was a feeling that Sikh officers may become targets of attack. Sikh officers may get into trouble. So there was a kind of decision taken or a message given that Sikh officers be kept away and they should not be carrying arms also.
Right.
So this came to be a bit of a not a proper thing to happen. So immediately what I did, that I went to police headquarters soon after, and I convinced the commissioner of police. I told him that no, Sikh officers also should remain there. Let us see what happens.
Right.
And let me tell you that one of the biggest satisfactions which I have till date about 1984 riots, because it was a very sad thing. The sadness and the kind of grief which is lasting for me, I mean, I can't explain to you. But then I had numerous very strong and very competent Sikh officers in my district.
Right.
One assistant commissioner of police, about whom I have talked extensively. Then there were at least 3-4 station house officers in my district who were Sikh officers. And I told them very clearly that they will not leave their places. I briefed them personally, did not allow them to leave their places, and they remained. And let me tell you, each one was attacked on the job. In fact, got injured. At least one was injured. One Sikh officer who was a very tall, very strong and handsome fellow, whom I admired as an officer also. I had to really protect him like a child in one of the occasions.
Right.
And Indira Gandhi was also being cremated in my district. This area of Rajghat and all was part of my district.
Right.
Lakhs of people had come. It was a huge problem to make arrangement for her cremation also. And there, one of the Sikh officers I told you, I mean, he was being kind of bullied and he was being stone pelted and things like that. I had to protect him. So on one particular occasion, I was on my normal kind of beat and I was moving around because almost round the clock I was on the beat. I was going around. So I learned about an attack on some police, some fellow, a Sikh fellow. And then with my team, because I was always carrying a person, I had a small police van. On that, I had a couple of policemen there. An inspector was there with me. So we rushed to this spot and a person was almost waylaid, almost being lynched, that kind of situation. And when we discovered that he was one of our officers,
Right.
and he was saved in the last nick of the moment. So these are the kinds of things which happened in those times. One of the trainees, assistant commissioners of police, a Sikh officer again, generally accompanied me. And then during riots, as you know, that I opened the police stations and converted them into refugee camps practically. Not refugee camp, that means they came and they started staying there. And we fed them, we looked after them. In fact, we opened langars kind of thing in all the police stations.
Right.
So it was a different kind of experience. And that particular point that you mentioned is very important, about which I have a lot of satisfaction. Okay.
Right. So let me tell our viewers that actually, even though the police received a lot of flack for not acting in 1984 riots as they should have, Central District, I believe, was the only district that was actually appreciated for prompt action in, and it being the most sensitive area with mixed population. It actually was a very sensitive area, and despite that, in many of the commissions also, which were later formed, the role of DCP Central, that is Mr. Amod Kant, was appreciated by many. So, sir, when we say that this 84 riot could have been averted, the police could have acted in a better or in a more prompt manner, what really happened? Is it the lack of, say, understanding of the situation? It just happening all of a sudden, not being prepared? What was it? Could have been averted.
No, see, I would not say that 84 riots could have been averted, but 84 riots uh, could have been tackled little better, perhaps. Very difficult to say, because see what happened, that in my own districts, I was so preoccupied that really I had no opportunity to go outside and see what's happening outside. But then the fact remains that if you look at the entire Delhi, nearly 3,000 Sikhs were targeted and they were massacred.
Right.
It happened very badly, very terrible thing. The total casualty in my district was very small, actually. Just about maybe 30-35 persons were killed, and 8 bodies of the 6 were actually found dumped in one of my areas, in Ridge area, that was there. And perhaps among the casualty, we had, let's say, 18 Hindus were also killed in this area, and maybe about 26 were killed. And injured also, the number of Hindus who got injured overall, as per the reports in the hospitals, well, I think was more than the number of persons, 6, who were injured in central Delhi. And we opened fire at many places. In hundreds of places, we wielded our lathi, we tried to stop them. And then we not only did that, we recovered huge properties. We made about 1,000 arrests in the district. So we tried to act. But I would not like to say that I was satisfied completely, because times were so difficult. I mean, for example, I recall that while I was in a particular place where there is a big tire market, DB Gupta Road and all, and there, as you know very well, that it was such a sad thing and such a cruel thing that these tires were actually used to kill, and they were burnt along with the bodies of Sikhs. And that particular area was full of tires. And I was present there in that area. And we did not allow a single event to take place there. It was a tire market, a huge tire market. And there we had more than a couple of thousand crowd was there. And we could negotiate, we could use force, and we could disperse them. So that kind of thing kept on happening in many places. So all these things came ultimately to be examined by the commissions. Rangnath Mishra Commission, as you know, was appointed soon after the 84 riots. And it went into great details. And it is a fact that they reported about the good work or whatever work we did in our district. They went out of way to appreciate our work. And then, so it was there. And subsequently also, after many years, Nanavati Commission was also appointed. Nanavati Commission looked into certain facts. And then ultimately, it also gave clean chit to my district. So Central Delhi, that way, its performance was brought on record. It's partly for the reason that we were not completely thrown away or inundated or maybe swept our feet. We tried to control the situation, and we could do it. Although we had the serious problem of manpower, serious problem of equipments and gadgets and firepower, everything. Let me tell you that Delhi police had just about 30 to 40 mobile vans in those times, 1984. And the force was almost 1/4 of what it became ultimately. So we had the huge problem of scarcity of manpower, scarcity of vehicles and communication, scarcity of all equipments in those times. And that could be one of the reasons, or perhaps these reasons also contributed towards the inadequate action or no action taken by many police officers in many areas. But of course, leadership counts. Decidedly in police, if you are a leader, you have to stand up to it. You have to go out into the situation. You have to lead your men physically. If you're not able to lead your officers and men, perhaps you cannot do it. especially in the situation of riots and all. Many riots, your people desert you because if they think that you are covered and you can't really go into the situation, they would not like to work with you. So, well, it matters a lot, those kinds of
So
things.
how much role does political pressure play in these situations? Because I'm saying that because I'll bring in the Delhi riot situation also that happened while the anti-CA protests were on. Same allegations the police faced, that the mob ran amok for 2 days for over 72 hours. The police was standing and not doing anything. Probably there was political pressure. There were allegations. There were theories. How much is this theory, or I would say allegation, of political pressure in these situations work? I mean, is it real or is it just theory?
The political pressure, or the pressure exercised by those who are in power, or the pressure exercised by those who happen to be other politicians or other kinds of leaders, or they happen to be from the government also many a times, bureaucrats also many a times. It's a reality, it happens. And the police, a police officer has to function in situations of conflicting demands, in situations of riots, where people are involved. And so there, obviously, when you are operating in a public place, when you are operating in a riotous situation, decidedly there are leaders who lead the rioters also.
Right.
There have to be. I mean, many a times the mobs are leaderless. That comes. But many a times, and majority of time, the mobs have some leaders, and there are people who are being led for whatever reason. 84 riots decidedly had small leaders all over. It is not that the mob was completely leaderless. Maybe, I mean, you are aware that several very important leaders have been indicted.
Right.
And then there have been cases, there have been inquiries against many leaders in Delhi. There have been inquiries and cases against police officers also for inaction, for conniving with, let's say, people at times. So that kind of situation comes in my district also, which I have reported in my book, and you will come to know about it.
We'll talk about that. Yes.
Very openly discussed about it. So the point I am trying to make, that in situation of law and order, it is very normal and natural that the mobs will be led by some people or misled by somebody. They turn violent because they are provocative speeches. They turn violent because there is an issue which is played up in a manner which takes a violent turn. So these are the situations which is a reality, and it was in full play so far as 84 riots are concerned.
Right. So you have mentioned these two lines, and I have made a note, so I would like to ask. You say law was not the ultimate guide, nor constitution supreme. What do you mean by that?
I mean, you're talking about those times, is it?
Yes, those times.
Decidedly, I mean, what I'm trying to say, that to implement the law, I mean, what the law requires that if you find a crime being committed, if you find some people who are taking law in their hands, you have the full authority to arrest the person. You have the full authority to exercise force and catch the person and put him behind the bar, produce in the court, register a case against him. So this is what the law says. And law flows from the Constitution of India.
Right.
So that has to prevail. Now, in situation like this, where let's say the anarchy is let loose over an entire city, or maybe in major parts of the country, in that kind of situation, the law gets subsumed by the situation which is so violent, situation which is so out of control. So I'm talking about that. So it was difficult. But then, as I mentioned to you, that in our district, we attempted to register a large number of cases. We arrested 1,000 people, I told you, in various cases of riots and all. Over 504 to 450 people were arrested for serious crimes like murders and riots and loot and all that stuff. So we tried to do it. But then it's my lament. I bemoan the fact, perhaps in my book, that yes, the overall situation was such that the law was not being implemented. The constitution's supremacy was not being felt.
Right. So when we talk about communal riots like these anti-Sikh riots, 84, or the Delhi riots, is there a specific formula that the police follows in tackling these? And how is the ground reality? How far is the ground reality from the legal provisions or the rule book?
See, there are rule books for everything. There are legal provisions for all, and police has powers also. Delhi police, of course, is empowered because we have a commissioner of police system. In 1984, also we had commissioner of police system.
Right.
In commissioner of police system, you don't have to look up to a magistrate for giving orders, for lathi charge or for controlling law and order situation. So you have the authority. And that authority has to be excised.
Right.
And well, what really happens, which has been my experience in situations of law and order, not only 84 riots. See, during the same period in 1980s, when I was Deputy Commissioner of Police, West Delhi, I was Additional DCP South. When I was Additional DCP South, let me inform you, there was a big 1-month strike in All India Institute of Medical Sciences. And let me inform you that the director was almost persona non grata. And for nearly a month, I was the negotiator. I became the mediator between the boys and the staff of the All India Institute, and of course the governing body or whoever. That kind of situation comes, so you have to play different kinds of roles. So in these 3 districts, and communal situation particularly, which you mentioned, walled city has a mixed population. And on small provocations, very, very small provocation. I mean, let's say a boy and a girl from different communities, they go away. There is a small accident in the walled city, let's say between a car and a cycle, and then there is a fight erupts, which is between 2 communities. Such a small things have led to massive communal riots in that area. I recall, which I have written also, that, for example, in the local stadium, very close to my area, there is a stadium. The match was going on, and of course, one community and the other community got divided in the football match. Other was that Dara Singh's wrestling was there, and something happened there. So these are kind of normal situations where the communal overtones, or let's say the sectoral overtones, they create that kind of situation in the riots take place. So you have to be very systematic about it. You cannot allow small things to grow into big things. The policeman has to be very, very careful to tackle these situations right in the beginning. If you do it, probably you can do it better.
So bringing it back to that political pressure that we were talking about, you've also mentioned in the book about one incident where your senior did not stand for you. So how important is it in policing for the leadership to be strong? And I am talking this in context of, you must have known about this recent protest by policemen against their own commissioner, which happened with the last commissioner. So this was something that was unprecedented, never heard of, that, policemen, head constables, inspectors, constables coming out on the roads and protesting outside their own headquarters, asking for a better leadership. So how important is the leadership? Because their concern was that our leaders don't stand up for us. We are the ones. If we take action, then then there's a problem. If we don't take action, then action is taken against us. So we don't have that sort of leadership. We don't have that sort of a senior leader standing beside us, telling us, "Go ahead."
If we say that the rule of law must prevail, if we say that the policeman's duty is to protect the community or those who are in a situation of crisis or disaster, then well, it applies on everybody. And the senior police officer has a role to play. The senior police officer has to lead. And decidedly, if the senior police officer's leadership is not found to be adequate, the juniors, the 80% of the police force happens to be the lower constable, the lower subordinate, as we call them. I mean, the constable and head constable. They look up to you, and any leader is tested in the time of crisis. So there, you cannot just say that there is some pressure. You cannot just say that what a particular kind of leaders feel, the other kind of leaders feel. You have to be neutral, you have to be strong, and you have to be assertive. I mean, you cannot really, let's say, become subservient to any kind of pressure while you have a legal duty to perform and you are not able to do it. Right. Nobody is going to kind of excuse you for that. And let me inform you, your own force doesn't excuse you. Your own people will not accept it.
Yes.
So that's the point which I'm trying to elaborate. Okay.
Right. So, sir, one last question on the riots. You have called it a class war. And that is what, in fact, I was trying to understand. Why have you called this riot a class war?
See, I have attempted to get into the background of 1984 riots, and I have shown that how this very strong and this very manly and this very powerful and very rich at times and successful community of Sikhs, how they were targeted. I've attempted to talk about it. Many of them came as refugees. Many of them were not so rich when they started off their life. But then slowly and gradually, this community did exceedingly well for themselves in the city of Delhi and other parts of the country. And they became targets. So there was a trend that could be found in 84 riots. And that trend I have attempted to analyze. there are different classes of people who live together. Delhi has peculiar kind of formation where affluent colony, next you find certain village, next you find certain slums. So that kind of combinations are there all over the city. It happens everywhere in big cities. And Delhi has grown like this. As you know that this city was built, rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt 7 times. So there are all kinds of people living in the city. So when I say that certain trend indicated that some kind of jealousy, some kind of grievance, some kind of class discrimination or that kind of situation that was there at the back of mind of many people, and it could be seen. It could be seen also. And I would not like to further elaborate except that I thought there was certain kind of class war, I would like to call it, in the given situation, which came just like that. I mean, it was not intended or it was not premeditated, but it happens on the spur of the moment, which happens many a times. Okay.
Right. Also, sir, you've spoken of a lot of commissions that were set up post the 1984 riots, and the details of these commissions, what happened. Is setting up a commission actually putting that case in cold storage, or something really comes out of it?
No, first of all, the commissions of inquiry are the bodies to recommend. If they have got very strong findings, if they are able to collect some very strong evidence, substantial evidence, that could become the basis for further action, legal action. Because commissions are not courts, let's be very clear.
Right.
And
Right.
so let us say some crimes are indicated or some evidence is found, then in that case, the police has to register cases and police has to investigate further after that. Police has to file charge sheet and the prosecutors or the lawyers have to go into the court and the judges have to decide about it. That process
Right.
has to be followed. Well, I think in Justice Rangnath Mishra Commission, it happened. It had to happen because that time there were some committees also appointed, like Ved Marwa was also heading committee. Kapoor Mittal committee was there. Several committees were appointed and some systematic work was done. Subsequently, Justice Nanavati Commission was appointed. They also remained in this work for a couple of years. But the results coming out of the second commission, I did not find them to be really so substantial. So
Right.
generally, it's an observation about commissions that commissions have to function in a particular manner so that they really give very clear findings. And the findings should be substantiated by evidence. And follow-up action should be done in a manner that relief is given to the people at large for whom the commission is appointed. It doesn't
Right.
happen many a times. Okay.
Right. So the book then actually seamlessly moves into the transistor blast phase where there were so many blasts and the police didn't know what was happening. It was a new method of doing blasts at that time. Plus there was no social media. So not that the police could have sent out a message to the public. Maybe that is why it caused a lot more damage than it would in current times. So, sir, you moved on to this investigation of how to piece together information, trace phone numbers. What is the kind of challenges that the police face when the enemy is like a faceless enemy like this? You have no clue who this person is. The bombs are going off in transistors in one part of the Delhi, then another part of Delhi, and everything is just scattered. How does a policeman really bring these things together to zero down on suspects? What are the kind of challenges that one faces? Because there are also a lot of pressure from media and, of course, the ruling dispensation and your seniors to crack the case and bring the culprits to book.
See, following 1984 riots, the biggest operation which was carried out by the terrorists or the extremists who were totally supported by the victims of 1984 riots was this case I called the transistor bomb blast cases. It happened on the 10th and 11th of May 1985. And suddenly, in Delhi, like crackers all over, the bombs started exploding, not only in Delhi, but 5 states were covered by this, the neighboring states of Delhi. And up to Jammu, there were cases, up to Punjab and Haryana, we had cases, Uttar Pradesh, we had cases, Delhi, we had cases. So these cases were a peculiar contraption, the IED, we call it, that transistor bombs had been made somewhere and people learned about it. And they were planted by the people, which we learned later that most of the people who planted these bombs happened to be the victims of 1984, the young people who had iron in their soul, and they were extremely aggrieved on account of the losses in 84 riots. So, so they planted these bombs. The bomb was manufactured somewhere. We learned later that nearly 100 bombs were manufactured and nearly, I think, 70 to 80 bombs were exploded. And over 85 people, 85 persons were killed in these bomb blasts, which happened in 2 days' time. And more than 150 persons got injured. Fortunately, while I was Deputy Commissioner of Police, Central Delhi again that time, I got information through someone. I mean, in fact, I received two sets of information, confidential information about it. And we could locate the particular house from where these bombs were manufactured and from where the entire thing was found out. I mean, the conspiracy was carried out, manufacture was done, and it was distributed to all of them.
Right.
I could find out, and we worked out the case very, very soon.
Right.
And the result was that we arrested over 50 such people who were directly involved in this case. And the kind of evidence we collected was unmatched. It was remarkable kind of investigation carried out by 40, 50 investigators from these states. The Honorable Supreme Court of India transferred these cases to us in Crime Branch. I was shifted as DCP Crime in 1985, investigated this case. So it was day in, day out operation for a couple of months. Well, that was a very important work.
In fact, you have beautifully in great detail shown and written how the investigation took place. But then once you read that investigation, you think that it's a very, very strong case. And then critical evidence goes missing from the court. What happened there, sir?
Actually, what we learned recently, because of course, after getting away from the district and crime branch in 1990, I had no idea what happened to the case. We are not supposed to follow up when you leave the place. So what happened that we understand, and I was told that almost all the incriminating evidence, all the material that we had seized and collected and produced as evidence, most of the documents, very, very important documents that were found, they all got stolen from the court and then from some other places. And the Honorable Court, actually the judges got the case filed and there was FIR, there is investigation. But towards the end, this case was destroyed in the sense that the judgments didn't come. But that is how it happens in many cases. These sensitive cases are like that.
Right.
Okay?
So, sir, that is what brings to my next question, a delayed trial. Like in this case, which was such a well investigated case, you could see, I mean, the kind of details that you have given in the book, anyone would read and say that it's a strong case, as I said. So delay in, say, trial, does it affect such well investigated cases? What does it say about our about our judiciary, about our criminal justice system also? If I can club that question.
I have referred to somewhere that India's criminal justice system is borrowed from Anglo-Saxon system, which is called accusatory. We have to prove case against individuals.
Right.
We are not exactly a fact-finding or the truth-finding agency.
Right.
See, in my considered opinion, my basic job is to find the truth. The truth could be in law and order, the truth could be in a case. Okay. And I have written this part also in the beginning in the book. Now, the issue is that if you try to prove a case against someone, then the entire method of operation changes. Here, the material was there. And the material could be produced in the court and the court could have taken a view. But that is not the way the Indian criminal justice system functions. We do not have inquisitory system. It is called accusatory system. Right. So I have serious grievances with this kind of system because that is why in most of the cases, as you know, that the conviction rate of in India is hardly about 15-20%. Not more than 20% cases get convicted. It's a very sad situation. And the pendency of case, more than 3 crore cases are pending at any given point of time. I mean, the entire system is cracking actually under the load of the cases and under the system which operates in a very weird way. So this is what I think as through my experience in policing for these 34 years.
So you have also beautifully explained in the book, in the backdrop of Operation Blue Star, how Sikh extremism was operating in Delhi, also with these attacks and these sporadic incidents of violence that were being reported in that period. And there is a black book that you have referred to, in fact, which then led to these political assassinations and an assassination of a ex-army general as well. So what was this black book and what was the relevance of this Mauser pistol that you have?
Mauser pistol.
Yes, that you have, that actually became the link between, piecing together these assassinations together. So it's quite fascinating how you've described how this pistol actually got you to crack these cases. So if you could just tell us a little about the Black Book and how, in the backdrop of Operation Blue Star, Sikh extremism was playing out in Delhi.
See, some of the rights bodies, PUDR in this case, People's Union for Democratic Rights, they brought out a book after thorough inquiry of the 1984 riots. And they talked about who are guilty. There was something called who are guilty, and some names were given. Well, I don't stand by it completely because the facts may not be completely accurate, but they were there. And then this was called the Black Book, as you mentioned it.
Okay.
So what happened that some persons, some individuals, political leaders were targeted for that reason. And what happened that when these very strong outfits of the extremist groups, when they started operating in Delhi, I mean, one of the known faces was Harjinder Singh Jinda.
Right.
And he was arrested by us. My team actually arrested him earlier also, soon after Lalit Makan had been assassinated and Arjun Das, who was a councillor, was assassinated. So that so-called Black Book or so-called who are guilty kind of thing, that became the basis. And Lalit Makan, who was a very popular member of parliament, Arjun Das, who was very close to the Gandhi family also. Now, they were targeted first and they were assassinated. And we arrested Harjinder Singh Jinda and some other people in the gang earlier. Now, this fellow was taken to Ahmedabad because he had committed many crimes. This gang had committed several cases in other states also. And at Ahmedabad, he escaped the custody. And he was joined by a couple of other gang members, one of them being Sukhdev Singh Sukha. So Sukha and Harjinder Singh Jinda, they joined hands and they killed the former Chief of Army Staff General A.S. Vaidya in Pune, which was a very important case again. Series of crimes they committed and targeted people are there. And I had the opportunity to investigate all these series of cases because that was the time I was Deputy Commissioner of Police Crime Branch.
Right.
These cases came to me. I had a very good team. We worked out these cases, all of them, the series of crimes. And then apart from that, several other crimes took place. But then that particular pistol that you're talking about, Mauser pistol, see what happened that particular weapon originated in Golden Temple. Okay. While Golden Temple was almost occupied by Sant Bhindrawale, that time there was a group and lot of weapons used to be there inside Golden Temple. One of the weapons which was located, which was traced from Golden Temple came out. And this gang committed a series of crimes in Punjab. Like Professor Tiwari was killed, and Ramesh Chandra, who was heading Punjab Kesari, was killed. Likewise, several assassinations took place, and this particular weapon was not used in all weapons, in all crimes, but then this weapon used to figure from time to time. So in a way, it became a kind of connecting link among other kinds of cases. So it helped us, and we could neutralize, we could arrest most of the gang members, and this case got worked out. Sukhdev Singh Sukha and Harjinder Singh Jinda were given death sentence. In Pune, they were executed. Okay.
Right. So then you moved to the Central Bureau of Investigation, where you had your brief period of a monotonous desk job that you have mentioned before the Rajiv Gandhi assassination case came to you. And it's quite an intriguing case because there's still a unit, the MDMA unit in CBI, that is looking into the case. What are the complications that this case has that it is still under investigation?
No, first of all, let me finish the previous part of your thing, because assassinations, political assassinations were not the last thing. Delhi was subjected to huge massacre after that.
Right.
And somebody called Surjit Singh Penta, who happened to be from Khalistani Commando Force, as they used to call it, he suddenly became very, very prominent, and he led a gang of people, and he was related to Jinda also, incidentally. So they committed massacre of people, a lot of people in South Delhi, in Greater Kailash area, CR Park, Chitrajan Park area, all that stuff. And we were able to get them also. But unfortunately, Penta committed suicide. Then following Operation Blue Star, there was something called Operation Black Thunder, yes, which was organized by Mr. KPS Gill. Mr. Ved Marwa also supported it. Right. And when he was surrendering, he committed suicide. So that was another set of crimes I thought I'll mention.
Yes, It was quite interesting how one after the other you were receiving that input and you were chasing that input, one shooting here, another here. They were going from one place to another, from Kalkaji, Govindpuri, and then finally that night, in fact, would have been extremely, I don't have words.
It was a horrible night. It was a horrible night. I could see the leadership of Ved Marwa very much in play, and I admired him a lot. In my book also, I have admired Ved Marwa.
Right.
KPS Gill, I have written about him. I have written about Mr. M.B. Kaushal. I have written
in fact, all your mentors you have mentioned in great
That's
detail.
correct. They are my mentors. Mr. Vijay Karan, who was director CBI. Mr. Vijay Karan, he was responsible to take me to CBI. And he was earlier Commissioner of Police of Delhi also. And there, well, I had a dull time for just a few days because I have explained that in certain words in my diary, in my book also. But then Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, and I had a background of investigating these terrorist crimes. So soon after, I mean, the day he was assassinated in the night, and next day, Mr. Vijay Karan called me up and he told me that I had to proceed to Madras. And I took the lead. I mean, they took the team from Delhi, including some of the forensic experts and some other good officers who were there. And we went to Madras. And let me inform you that although it was a massive investigation, I mean, no other investigation can be compared to Rajiv Gandhi assassination, because two other big assassinations, noteworthy assassinations in India, Mahatma Gandhi assassination and Indira Gandhi assassination, in both the cases, the killers were caught,
right,
or they were neutralized. But here it was complete dark. You know, we had no clue about it. It was very difficult. And ultimately, you mentioned to some kind of inquiries is still going on about international or the larger conspiracy, I call it.
Right,
larger conspiracy. But so far as the case is concerned, we were able to work out this case in very short period. Just about 10-15 days, we had a good clue. We could identify the main conspirator, that one-eyed Jack called Shivrasan or Raghuvaran. We came to know about him. We were able to arrest some of the perpetrators immediately. Right. We tracked him down, and it's unfortunate, about which also I have written. It's unfortunate that Shivrasan, along with a girl called Shubha, who happened to be the substitute for Dhanu, who killed herself by blasting herself while killing Mr. Rajiv Gandhi and other people who died in this particular event. Shubha also committed suicide along with Shivrasan while they were about to be caught in a place called Kunan Kutte near Bangalore. So that was a sad ending to a marvelous investigation. But then so far as investigation is concerned, we carried out investigation in India, in Sri Lanka, in some other countries. I traveled to these countries also. And then this investigation had huge international ramifications, and putting the evidence together, because we had a very strong support base. I mean, this LTT cadre, which originated from Prabhakaran, who was LTT Supremo, LTT Tigress leader called Akila, and Potu Aman, who was the intelligence chief of LTT. They guided Shivrasan to do it, and there was a gang here. And there was a group of people between Indian sympathizers and those who came from Sri Lanka. They committed this crime. It was very difficult, but it went off very well. And as you know that till date, those couple of people who were sentenced to death, who were death sentence has been commuted, are still in the jail. They have not released yet.
Right. So you have dealt with extreme law and order situations, and you have investigated these most gruesome of cases. So, and when you talk about insurgency, you've also mentioned in the book about the Naga insurgency, because you've been posted there also. So while you were in Arunachal Pradesh also, you have dealt with these issues. So when we talk about insurgency, you have said that you really need to know and be a part of the locals, even as a police officer, and to understand what the real issues are instead of just imposing or, just giving out orders. You have also said that, deployment of force is not a solution. So what is the solution, sir? And I'll bring in the abrogation of 370 here in Jammu and Kashmir, wherein there was heavy deployment, and there was the internet was shut down for so many months. In fact, even now it's only 2G that is working there. There were political detentions. How do you say that? How do you see this, sir, the abrogation of 370, and how the government actually carried it out?
starting from insurgency, for example, I was a DIG in Mizoram, DIG range of Mizoram, not so far away from the time when Mizoram we became friendly. Practically, I mean, that was not so hostile. Mizoram almost became separated from India. That was the position at one time, if you recall. And it was brought back. It was brought back in a very systematic manner. I mean, the people were also convinced about it. Arunachal Pradesh, for example, part of Arunachal Pradesh district called Tirap and Changlang, that district, they are next to Nagaland and they behave like Nagaland. Nagaland has got serious problem even now. Things are improving
Right.
though. So this is, I could feel that if you beat the people, if you are able to get your feet and heart into it, the people respond to it. And not only because you do community policing, but also because the policeman's job is to work with the people, work with the society. You can't develop any information. You cannot create confidence. You cannot work in situations of law and order or any other situation unless you are friendly with the people. I mean, that goes without saying. Insurgency is no exception, according to me. Insurgency also is part of police work and should be done that way. Even Mr. KPS Gill, let me inform you that that is a tribute I have paid to him, saying that Mr. KPS Gill very strongly supported the democratic process while Punjab was at the peak of an insurgency, peak of terrorism. So this is the work that police does and succeeds also. So, well, I think you asked some other question about it. You are talking about Kashmir, is it?
Yes.
Well, Kashmir, I do not have any experience of policing in Kashmir, but then yes, I have experience of working in the social sector in Kashmir. Even now, Prayas has got some activities in Kashmir. We are running a project on disaster and my people are going to Kashmir. I have very deep relations with many of the voluntary organizers of Kashmir who are doing a remarkable job. In fact, 60 of them, I was trying to develop along with Niti Aayog an action plan for Kashmir. And I feel that ultimately the normalcy in Kashmir will prevail when we are able to get the civil society on board. Civil society has to participate for ultimate and the final normalcy. Okay.
Right. Right. So, apart from being involved in these major investigations of these big cases, you've also worked with drugs. So, when we talk about Narcotics Control Bureau and we talk about narco terror, that is one. But right now, NCB was in news for all the wrong reasons. You must have seen that Riya Chakrabarti was arrested, and along with her brother was arrested. Then a lot of actors were arrested. How do you see this case, sir? Because when I see in the book that you're talking about narco terrorism, which is one aspect of it, but when you talk about small quantity of drug, and when you talk about cannabis, or when you talk about, say, procurement of this small quantity or consumption of this small quantity, how do you look at this as a police officer?
No, see what happened that again, my fortune or misfortune that I had to work at a time when drugs happened to be a very serious problem in India, in Delhi particularly.
Right.
1980s are not only the most violent decade, as I have tried to portray these 10 years story up to 1991. The drugs also incidentally suddenly grew exponentially because of heroin, smack and some other things.
Right.
And India, as you know, sits in the middle of Golden Crescent, Golden Triangle and Nepal.
Right.
India could have become like, let's say, Colombia and Bolivia or Chile, but India did not become like that.
Right.
We have done exceedingly well, let me inform you. And 1986, this Narcotic Drug Psychotropic Substances Act was brought, thanks to Rajiv Gandhi. And then this Narcotic Control Bureau was created, and Mr. B.V. Kumar, an outstanding officer, I worked with him separately. I was Deputy Commissioner of Police, he was from Customs, but we had excellent relationship. And then we arrested 5,834 drug peddlers and drug addicts in a matter of 2.5 years, about whom I conducted a study, which I have written in the book also.
Right.
And we found that majority of them happened to be ordinary people. And they became drug addicts, and they also were peddlers, for example. They were not big syndicates, because we also worked against big syndicates, and we were able to catch big quantities of drugs also, but small quantities. These small quantity drugs are a different phenomena altogether. And then to give extraordinary importance to it, except in its, let's say, social part of it. The NDPS Act provides that a small quantity, for small quantity drugs, you have got a small punishment also. And perhaps their de-addiction, their treatment is far more important. Right. It has a social purpose. It has a social way to go about it. So in my opinion, all this huge publicity about the seizure or perhaps people getting used to drugs somewhere and they are being caught, there has to be a program, a very systematic program to eliminate this kind of problem. It's a serious malady, because
Right.
even those big drug traffickers ultimately feed small quantities
Right.
to that extent. But then I think it's extraordinary importance being given. I'm not really impressed by it. Okay.
You have mentioned in great detail also about how these peddlers are not themselves consuming drugs and how these drugs actually enter India. So I'm not going to give out much details because I would want the viewers to actually read the book and know about it themselves. In fact, thank you so much, sir. There are so many topics to talk about because you have such a sea of experience, but then we are just running out of time. Congratulations once more again, sir, for your book, Khaki in the Dust Storm. I have got my copy. I have read it. In fact, I'm going to read it again because it has so many details that one needs to actually make their own notes while reading these books, by reading this book. So I'm going to wait for the next copy, sir. I hope that part 2 comes out soon. All the very best. And thank you so much for being with us today, sir.
No, I only wish, thank you very much. I only wish that the professionals, may perhaps the police officers and the investigators and the people from the legal community, they would love to read it, because I have been very authentic, very factual, and very truthful, and
Absolutely.
try to explain things from the social point of view also. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.